Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the headquarters. I hope you are enjoying Corpse Child's The Christmas City Massacre of Willowwood High. Now, for part 2. I was now in the middle of a street. Not like a regular street, though, but like an old-timey cobblestone road, and on it I could see people walking and riding in horse-drawn carriages. What the hell? I looked around. All around me I could see shops and saloons, looking like I was in the middle of a set to an old Western movie. I remember just standing there, wondering if any of them would notice me, say something to me maybe. I wondered this, while also, ironically, answering it with, "Of course it ain't real. It's not old West times anymore, right?" But how the hell was I there? And understand that again, I wasn't altogether clear on the fact that I was asleep. To my mind, the only rational explanation was that I'd somehow slipped through the cracks of reality or something, and was now in the Wild West. People walked past me, not paying me any attention. To my right was a shoe parlor, a gun shop, and an inn, while at my left there was a saloon and the sheriff's office. I would have passed all this off as a dream, until I found myself being shouted at by some guy in a carriage, shaking his fists and yelling at me to get the hell out of the way. I went then into the saloon. All around me were a bunch of belligerent drunks playing blackjack and golfing at whatever it was someone in their group had said. I remember going up to the bar and asking the bartender, "Hey there, what day is it?" At first, he looked me up and down, raising an eyebrow before asking me if my mother knew where I was. Figured as much, right? I was only 17 at the time. I answered that my mother was dead, and my father was a fisherman out on a long expedition. "Well, to answer your question," he said, "it's Saturday. Hence the business." He gestured his arm around at everyone present, and of course, Christmas is coming around the corner. "Okay, thank you," I said before turning and running. I sprinted and ended up running at least 5 miles. At least, that's what it seemed like, before I stopped out of exhaustion. I appeared now to be in the middle of a more rural-looking area. About 3 yards ahead of me sat a farm, one that was dilapidated as hell, looking like one of those shanty houses from the Great Depression, with its shingles looking like they could have been held together with nothing more than bubblegum and prayers. The fields, too, looked like they were wilting and dying. You'd see this and you'd think, well, nobody could possibly be living here, right? Well, you'd be wrong. Hell, I know. I thought the same thing. I found this out when I saw, only faintly, what looked to be a group of people gathered around a small bonfire. The smoke was already towering high into the sky. The smoke was somehow intermingling with the air, causing it to all begin to spread throughout the sky. In seconds, what would have been only noon turned into more like midnight. The sun nor the clouds were anywhere in sight. A shriek rang out from the group ahead, causing me to drop to my knees, clutching my ears. And familiarly, the shriek didn't dissipate gradually. It continued well past 3 minutes. Strangely, rather than straight up going deaf like you'd expect from something like this, I instead managed to adjust to the sound. My ears stopped ringing, my head stopped pounding, and even my heart slowed down from the sudden rush. It was then, listening closer and longer, that I realized that this was the chorus I'd been hearing all this time. It was them. Their chorus. My foot lifted, wanting to walk over to them. My rational mind, one that was still mostly in control here, hindered me from progressing. The chorus sounded so tempting now, though. Funny, too, because this was the first time I'd really found myself this mesmerized by it. You know, in the past, I was pretty much unable to feel anything, even mesmerized. But now, up close and personal like this, I couldn't help it. The flames I saw climbed higher and higher. It soon dwarfed the congregation around it, and the chorus crescendoed. They all fell to their knees as one of them held something up in their arms. I squinted to try and see what it was. To me, though, it was nothing more than a blurry patch. Then, I heard the cries of at least 1,000 or so children, which made my stomach feel horrible. What the hell is this? Who are these people? And why are they screeching? Who is that in their arms? That was it. I couldn't stay in place anymore. I willed myself to move again. Each inch closer I got, the more in tune with the story I was being told through the singing. By the time I'd reached out to them, they'd already turned to face me. There were these strange things, like the fact that I couldn't see any of their faces. Each of them wore long hoods. I watched them look at each other before fleeing. The chorus continued with them, carrying on down, following them. They left the fire still going, forcing me to essentially be the one to have to go over and fix it. I put out the fire before taking off in the direction of the hooded figures, which it was surprisingly easy to find where they're going to be. All that was necessary was to follow the persistent sound that kept going strong, being well past the area. When I did find the area that they were in again, they were all splayed across the ground in spread eagle formations. I walked over and checked a pulse on any of them. No luck. What the fuck were they? When I lifted up their robes, one in particular caught my eye and sent my heart racing. Not in a good way either. It was a woman, about late 30s, early 40s, aged. She strikingly resembled those I'd seen on one of the news articles I'd seen before. It was Maria. It was Thomas's mother. Come to think of it too, of all of them, she was, I think, the one that was holding up the baby as a sacrifice. She was the one who was singing the loudest. I looked around before taking off one of the members' robes and taking off with it, folding it and taking it down to the sheriff. I remember walking in and holding the folded robe. 3 cultists just took their lives in the woods, I told him, no doubt sounding like a damn lunatic. He raised his eyebrow at me for a second. Uh-huh. And where did this happen, young man? He asked. It was one of the houses. I pointed in the direction I'd come from. He turned around, looking at the patrons with the same sort of look he had with me, before turning back to me. You said you saw a gathering at a home in Willow Lane? He asked, and you're still here to tell about it. I'm serious, sir. They were all sitting around a large fire, and they had a baby with them. A child? Piped up one of the patrons near the exit. Did you see who? No, I was too far away. A child went missing a day or two ago. I think it was one of the ones from St. Augustine's. I turned to him, my eyes wide, and asked, St. Augustine's? You mean the orphanage? He nodded his head. I looked at the floor. Wasn't Thomas an orphan? Yeah, I think it was a little boy. I can't remember his name. I think it was Thomas. I finished shaking, hoping to God he was going to say no. Unfortunately, he didn't. Yeah, that's his name. You know him? I clammed up. How the hell was I supposed to explain this to him? Yeah, see, I know all about him because I'm from the future, where this little shit's life is a fucking family tradition on the holidays. I'll say this much. If I had a better understanding of what the hell was going on, and how it was going on, I'd have probably given him this answer, if only to see what his reaction would have been. Before too much more time had passed, though, someone from the back pointed out the fact that the sky had grown dark. When the time was asked, the clock read that it had only just passed noon. Then, coming from absolutely nowhere, while everywhere, there was the laughter of a baby, echoing all throughout the saloon. Everyone was throwing their heads in every direction in a panic. I couldn't seem to move, though. It was happening again. The paralysis. Just like in the car, I seemed to go completely numb, in both body and mind. I couldn't form a coherent thought. Everyone around me began to get up and leave the saloon, some of them muttering nervously to themselves and each other. I didn't, though. I stayed put, and stayed such when the saloon began crumbling away around me. The walls, the ceiling, everything, all withered away, exposing nothing now but a blackened void. When the last remnants of the saloon were gone and I was alone in the void, I began to see the same thing happen to me. Starting from my hands, I could see them start dissolving away. It wasn't painful. In fact, it wasn't anything at all. I couldn't feel either pain or comfort from it, or anything else from that matter. I remember waking up again just after I watched my arm erode away. The last thing I remember hearing, as I faded out, was a child's voice, saying to me something to the effect of, "How does it feel being forgotten about?" When I woke up, it was Ma shaking me awake.
Joshua! Joshua!
My eyes snapped open and my head jerked upwards. I swung my head around. I was in my bed, but I was surrounded by Ma, Dad, and 2 doctors I didn't recognize at all. What the hell?
Oh, honey, you had us worried sick,
exclaimed Ma, wrapping me in the most suffocating bear hug of my life. Ma, what's going on?
I thought you weren't ever going to wake up. We tried everything.
What are you talking about? My head started to hurt. Groaning, I clutched my forehead and asked, "How long was I out?" "Almost 4 days," Dad said. I looked at him. My eyes doubled in size. I could tell from his face, too, he wasn't lying. I looked away from him to my wall. 4 days? How? "If we may," started one of the accompanying doctors, "we'd like to ask your son a few questions in private." From my peripheral vision alone, I could see that Ma was not on board with that, at all. She looked at Dad, who looked down. I knew he didn't want to do it either. But I think he realized that whatever they may or may not have been planning to do, he knew that it might be the only way all of this could possibly end. He took Ma's hand and got up, leading them back downstairs, leaving me alone with the doctors. "We're going to ask you a few small questions, and then we'll be on our way, okay?" Okay. "Good. Now, have you ever heard of Thomas Thatcher?" "Well, duh, they talk about him every year at school." I chuckled a bit, despite still feeling groggy, and added, "Hell, I'm supposed to play him in the school play this year." They both looked at each other and back to me. "School play?" I nodded. "Yeah, Christmas City?" The doctor nodded and asked if I'd ever played Thomas Thatcher in Christmas City before. I shook my head, and he nodded. "But you've been in a play before, yes?" "Uh-huh." "Have you ever felt this way before doing this?" "What do you mean?" "Such as the things you'd explained a few days ago at the office, or nearly slipping into a coma." "No, I haven't." Okay." He nodded to his partner, and then the 2 of them headed for the door. As they did, he told me, "I'm going to write a recommendation to the school requesting that you be removed from the play. I figured that would be best for your recovery. In the meantime, I'd suggest plenty of bed rest and perhaps light foods, like soup, crackers, bread, the usual." They turned then and exited my room. I laid there in my bed, staring blankly at a wall. Something wasn't sitting right. I couldn't tell if it was the strange line of questions from the doctors, or the ominous question from the dream, or perhaps both. But I just felt so numb, so detached from everything, that I couldn't even begin to try to come up with explanations for either, or anything else. About a minute passed, and I was asleep again. Thankfully, it was just a normal sleep this time. Well, normal as it can be, having no dreams whatsoever. Which was common for me, by the way. I felt a bit dizzy when I woke up again. It was a nightmare, and it was just in time when Ma called me downstairs for dinner. It was a struggle for me to make it down without stumbling or falling down. Aside from the nausea, I still felt empty for some reason. Like the world around me was nothing but a blank wall. I couldn't think of anything that would have made me happy. Like the fact that I was supposed to be getting a brand new phone and AirPods for Christmas. Or the fact that I was supposed to be able to go see my girlfriend at the time and her family at the Christmas Light Festival in just a few days. I was even going to sleep over, too. None of it. Nothing could make me happy. Nor sad. I couldn't feel anything. I made it into the kitchen and slumped in my chair. Mom was finishing setting the food spread while Dad sat pouring his drink. "Well, hey there, pal," he piped up in a tone more cheerful than I ever remember him addressing me with. Because of this, I was confused. Hey, Dad. You think this time you'll stay awake for a while?" He chuckled when he said that. I stared at the table, examining it closely, counting every little brush mark in it. Ma started bringing over the food platters. As she did, Dad joked, saying, "Well, hun, looks like we're losing signal on the boy. Better break out the rabbit ears." "Oh, come off it, Ron," she scolded lightly. In the middle of the table was a giant platter of lasagna, triple cheese, and 4 meat. My specialty dish for at least the past 4 years. Normally, I'd be salivating at the first sight of it, but not this time. This time I looked at it, and my stomach began screaming at me. A hole had seemingly been burned into it. I could see my hand reaching over, shaking as it did so as I tried to force myself to stop. But I couldn't. I just about made it to the handle of the serving ladle when Ma slapped the back of my hand. "Joshua," she said, "I know you love lasagna night, but you know we don't touch so much as a single crumb without saying grace first." I remember just blankly darting my eyes back and forth between her and the lasagna. Truthfully, I couldn't have cared less about saying grace, or anything like that. I usually always just put on a face and play along, but right then, having no inclination to care about anything at all, much less asking the blessing over meals, my hand rose again. I remember her frowning. "Joshua, are you okay?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "You're trying to eat before we've said grace. Twice now. What's the deal?" I looked at her, then to Dad, then back to her. Nothing, My eyes fell on the dish in front of me. It was so hot, so delicious, so savory looking. My stomach was so empty. My hand was reaching out for the serving ladle again. So hungry. "Here, hun, let me take this one," Dad chimed in. He winked at me and added, "I'll make it quick." He got us to join hands and actually made good on his promise of asking the quickest blessing ever, at least compared to what I've heard. Once that was over, I all but seized the ladle and scooped up a heaping mound of gooey goodness, slapping it on my plate. Ma's eyes swelled to the same size as the heaping I'd just served myself. "Good Lord, Joshua! How are you going to eat all that by yourself?" By the time she made it that far, my face was pretty much buried in the lasagna. And so, if she had said more, I don't think I ever heard it. I did hear Dad make a crack at me saying, "Damn! Nothing like a coma to bring out a man's appetite, eh, boy?" Just like with Ma, I paid no attention. I was far too damn focused on devouring every last bit of lasagna on my plate. Not just that, the entire platter. I wanted it all. All of it. I wanted it. I needed it. At one point, I started to choke a bit, to which Ma fussed at me to slow down. I didn't, of course. I wasn't sure of it then, but I remember thinking to myself that the lasagna was somehow scarce, a rare commodity of sort. One that I'd only have once in every other blue moon. Dad was right too. Whatever was actually going on with me before all of this craziness, it served to increase my appetite, while also further detaching me from the rest of the world. In seconds, I'd cleared my plate dry, and was going in for more. I'd like to point out, to my shame of course, that Ma nor Dad had even gotten their first helpings yet. I didn't think about any of that back then, but looking back, I have to wonder just how the hell they kept their angers in check. I cleared my second, third, and even a fourth full plate of lasagna before I felt the sense to stop and let it all settle. I sat back, and Ma and Dad hesitantly reached over and served themselves as much of what was left as they possibly could. I still felt like I wanted more, and so, just as Ma was finishing her plate of food, I'd hopped up from the table and told Ma I was going back up to my room for the night. What's funny is, at least for the first 3 or 4 seconds, while I was on my way back to my bedroom, everything was fine, save for the fact that I still felt kind of hungry. I got to my room, however, and that feeling amplified almost 100-fold. I now felt like the entirety of my stomach had been hollowed out. I felt like I hadn't eaten in weeks. The second my foot crossed the threshold of my bedroom, I was doubled over in pain, clutching my stomach in agony. My stomach felt hollow, so much so in fact that it had somehow already contracted in on itself. Like it would if I had been starving. Except, of course, I wasn't starving. Fatigue eventually kicked in, and I was out. I didn't make it onto the bed either. I just passed out, right then and there, curled in pain, on the floor. I wasn't so lucky this time either with being able to dream free. Just like last time, before I even realized I was asleep, I was in the same western-looking setting, this time a little further into town. By the appearance of the blacksmith shop at the end of the lane, I knew that this was downtown Weeping Willow. I knew this because that same building is still there in present day, though run down and completely gutted. It was nighttime too, and it was extremely cold. When I looked up, I watched in almost sheer horror as small flurries fell from the sky. It was snowing, and I was all alone, out in the middle of a street, no coat, no mitts, hat, nothing. I looked around for somewhere to go and try and escape the cold, but just my dumbass luck, everywhere was closed. 2 seconds later, wheels started turning in my head, and shit began to click. Last time the bartender told me that Christmas was just around the corner. It's snowing now, and everything's closed. Today was Christmas. I trudged forward as best I could. I looked around, shivering like crazy, trying to find maybe a box on the side of the road, or maybe some kind of dumpster or something that I could crawl into and make some sort of refuge into. Or maybe I'll try to make a fire or something to keep warm. About 10 seconds in, I lost all feeling in both my fingers and my toes. Another 30 seconds, I lost all feeling in my face as well. I couldn't even flutter my eyelids. I finally stopped altogether and collapsed onto the ground. On the ground, laid out in snow, I couldn't even move my arms enough to try huddling into myself. I was completely immobilized. To a degree, my brain was frozen too, just like the rest of my body. And to top it all off, I felt so damn hungry. I could still see somewhat. My vision was a cloud. In this cloud, all I could see were speckles of white falling to meet giant fields of white around me. That was until I watched a slim figure materialize in front of me. I couldn't make out any features, obviously. Or any features, in fact. But I could at least tell from the general outline that this figure was female in shape. She sort of hovered across the snow towards me. When she reached me, she bent down and looked directly into my eyes. I couldn't see her eyes, but I could see that her face was a pale white. Her head cocked to the side for a second, before her arm reached out and touched my face. I can't exactly say what her touch felt like, but I imagined it somehow feeling extremely soft, soothing, as she stroked my face in almost a loving sort of manner. Then she scooped me up into her arms, and like a thief in the night, She glided back across the snow where she'd come, whisking me away along with her. I couldn't keep up with where we were going or how far we'd gone. I couldn't even wonder where we were going, or who I was even with. Right then, my brain shut down. I might as well have been a vegetable. When we'd stopped, which it took me a couple of seconds to realize we even had, I was in a field of snow, with no buildings around me or anything. I could tell we must have been outside of the bounds of Weeping Willow. I was set down gently, and when I looked up, I watched as 2 or 3 others, all dressed in black, joined in around her. They surrounded me, raising their arms into the air, and suddenly, a jolt of warmth spouted from the inside of my right side, and it quickly spread until eventually, my whole body began defrosting itself. First to return to me was my sight. Gradually, the view of the figures became clearer and clearer. I still couldn't see any of their faces, except for the woman's. And she was, who else but Maria Thatcher. She looked down at me, grinning warmly, like she was about to invite me into her house for milk and cookies. Next to come to me was my hearing. When I could hear what must have been the other 2 figures in their choralization from before, their hands were raised and their necks were raised high. Maria reached into her sleeve and withdrew a decorated sort of dagger. Its blade was an extremely fancy, extremely weird design. One which was a squiggly sort of design, like you'd see something in movies. Movies which include themes of human sacrifice, that is. My eyes snapped open at this prospect. Wait, that's what's about to happen, isn't it? Dear fucking God, I'm about to be sacrificed. Hey guys, just a real quick outro here. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. If you haven't already, go check out Corpse Child's website. I truly appreciate him letting me read this story. Another real quick thing, I've got a couple of really neat projects for my channel coming up. I'm hoping to be able to do one that I've been dying to do that will be a group read, so be on the lookout for that. I've got a couple other videos lined up way before that. That one's going to take a while because of, scheduling and everything, and I'm still waiting to hear back from the author. So, just thank you again so much for watching. Anyway, peace out. Night, y'all.